Hello, and welcome back to my channel where I review historical fiction books and true crime. And I also like to research them as well to find the truth in the stories. So if you like history and you like books, definitely subscribe to my channel. So the book today I want to talk about is The Weight of Ink by Rachel Kadish. Now this book takes place in London in the 1600s during the Black Death. Now what's significant about the story is this is about a blind rabbi who has a female scriber, which is pretty unusual in the time due to, a lot of women were not educated, specifically young women. She was also a Jew from Amsterdam. She transferred to London, which Jews were really not allowed in London at the time. Amsterdam was one of the few places that Jews were allowed during this time. In this book, it also talks about how different branches of the Jews started to form and create different ideas, and some of it was considered heresy. I found this book a little bit confusing just because I did not know all the background on it, and now that I am more aware of what was going on during this time, this book makes a lot more sense. It's still a good book, but there was definitely a lot of things in this book that I was not aware of, so it kind of went over my head. So what do? I research it. So I'm actually going to go prior to this story that kind of leads up to what is happening at this point to make sense of the story. I'm actually going to go all the way back in time to the year of 1290 when the king was Edward I. Now, that's quite a bit far back, but I promise it does have something to do with the story. So during this time, there was a lot of upheaval. It was a lot of conflict of religions. Now, King Edward I, he had created something called the Edict of Expulsion. So what is that? That is during this time, the Jews were the only people that were moneylenders at the time. This was not a job that Christians had. And unfortunately, King Edward was wanting to go to war with France, but needed the money to do so. The Edict of Expulsion was written to basically tell the Jews you have a certain amount of days to get out of England. This way, the money stayed in England and could help King Edward go to Parliament and get approval for a tax increase to help fund the war. So that is why the Jews could not be in England for many centuries due to that ban. Now I'm actually going to take the story back a little bit even further until the 9th century. Now the Weight of Ink focuses on the Jews specifically in Amsterdam. Now how did the Jews get to Amsterdam and why were they there? Well, they are considered Sephardic Jews. What are Sephardic Jews? They are from the Iberian Peninsula, or where Spain and Portugal are today. The Iberian Peninsula was actually under Muslim rule from the 9th century all the way until 1492. Now, they lost the rule in a war called the Granada War against Portugal in Spain. After the Granada War and the Muslim defeat, Spain and parts of Portugal had actually signed a decree called the Alhambra Decree. Basically, this was what they were really trying to accomplish here was to turn Spain and Portugal into Christianity. They wanted a predominant Christianity peninsula. So they had a very high Jewish population as well. So they signed this decree basically telling the Jews you have two options. You can either convert to Christianity or we're going to give you a few months to leave and go somewhere else. Now, this decree was not revoked until 1868. Now, this decree was actually made by the monarch of Spain, and I thought it was interesting at the time. It was Ferdinand II and Isabella I of Castile who came up with this decree, and those are actually the parents of Catherine of Aragon, who is the first wife of King Henry VIII. Jews that migrated from Spain and Portugal and went up to Amsterdam, they were called the Sephardic Jews. The reason why they chose Amsterdam is because Amsterdam was very tolerant of different religions, and they had a lot of Jewish merchants, so it was already kind of developing a Jewish community as well. Part of Written in Ink, like I said, it was a woman scribe. She was a Sephardic Jew. She was migrated actually from Amsterdam to England, which, like I pointed out earlier, how that was such a big deal because they technically were not allowed in England at the time. So her and the blind rabbi, a lot of Jews had to hide their identities. Now, there were some Jews that actually did portray to be Christians on the outside, but still practiced Judaism in private. Now, this book also takes place during the Black Plague, which was in the years 1665 to 1666, which caused London specifically to lose about 15 to 20% of the population at the time. They are guesstimating that it was probably about 100,000 people that died during the Black Plague. The plague was spread by fleas and rats. So a lot of the upper class moved out of London, and a lot of people didn't have anywhere to go, so they stayed in the city, and a lot of them perished because of it. And a lot of people have a weird thought on why it ended. Some believe because winter was coming, because it ended roughly in September, but there was also a major fire that happened in London that burned down many buildings. I'm talking it burnt down 13,000 homes at the time. Now, it could be coincidental, but there really is no scientific evidence that this really did cause the plague to end. However, it did take care of the rat problem in London. So the response to this great fire was to make everything out of brick because it was harder for the rats to get in brick. And they're not such a fire hazard either. But they forgot to address the sanitary issues. So brick really was not going to do a whole lot. What I found very interesting about this when I was doing research is there was actually a recent outbreak of the plague in 2017 in Madagascar that killed 209 people. That is crazy. Now, like I said, during this time, there was actually a lot of uproar in the Jewish community over a rabbi named Zavai, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He was saying that he was the Messiah that had come back, and so a lot of people believed that the end was coming, that their time for the Holy Land was coming. Obviously, that didn't go over very well with other rabbis who were like, no, you're not. It was called the Sabbatian movement. Now, there was another rabbi that was mentioned in the Manasseh ben Israel, is I believe how you pronounce his name. He was a Marranos Jew, which was a Sephardic Jew that was practicing Christianity on the outside. Privately, he worshiped Judaism. He was a real rabbi, and he actually founded the first Hebrew printing press in Amsterdam at the time and printed all of his works in several different languages, including Hebrew, Spanish, Latin, and Portuguese. Now, he had this big belief that the Messiah would only return at the dispersal of Jews, so Jews need to migrate, they need to go out. However, his biggest goal was to get the Jews allowed back into England to be recognized. He even went before Oliver Cromwell to beg for the recognition of Jews in England at the time. However, it did not happen until after his death. Unfortunately, he died thinking that he was a failure, but in reality, shortly after he died, they finally lifted the ban on Jews in England and actually protected them as well. Now, another person that was mentioned in the book, Benedict Desposa, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Now, he was someone that liked to ask questions. He was part of the Enlightenment movement, which at the time was very hush-hush. You do not talk about it because it was considered heresy. Basically, it was about people, thinking for themselves, kind of starting to separate church and state, if you will. And he was kind of hated by a lot of people, but he did challenge a lot of minds as well. So, and he also liked to ask questions about the Bible, which again was a big no-no. That was a huge sin at the time. And eventually he was excommunicated, but still encouraged people to think for themselves and challenging people as well. So yeah, I actually learned a lot about this book after reading it. Now let's talk about the book itself. Now, this book I would say definitely I give it 4 stars. I do not give it 5. I try to save my 5s for books that I absolutely love. This book, I really enjoyed it. It is kind of a thicker book, but like I said, it kind of got confusing sometimes. It was a lot of information, and I didn't know about any of this stuff until I did my own research after reading it. I think if I would have known all this information prior, this book would have made a little more sense to me. It is a slow burn book, but it is a really good book. I think the author did a really good job on character development. I really liked the characters in this. And this book is actually a dual storyline as well. So one in the 1600s and then one in today's world, basically the historian that finds these scribes, and she's trying to figure out who this person was, what they were doing, and who this woman was that was the scribe for a blind rabbi. So it's a mix of 2 completely different eras. And I think the author did really good with the dual storyline, because I feel like sometimes authors lack on one side or the other, but this, I actually liked the characters in both sides. They both held up their end of the story. I would definitely recommend this book. I would definitely read it again.